a child, what was your ambition?
If you're elected president, what will you change in the White House?
How long have you been wanting to run for president?
Then it was time.
Whenever I get the chance, I like to take my dog out and go out to the ocean. What do you like to do in your free time?
Well, I'm a big walker. I'm not a jogger, but I love to get out and just tramp. Sometimes I try to go fast enough so I get some good exercise out of it, too. When I'm in a city, if I walk, I go where there are some shops so I can do a little window shopping at the same time.
Senator McGovern, what would you do to help Americans who are poor or out of work?
We have to do a number of things. One basic requirement of everybody is enough to eat. And instead of cutting back on our food programs, as has happened in recent years, I'd go the other direction. I would make sure in a country like this where we have more food than we know what to do with, we talk about farm surpluses and what are we going to do with all this food, I'd make sure that no one went hungry in America. I would also try to do more about health care. I think it's important that people not be penalized and denied good health care when they're sick simply because they're poor. So we ought to be strengthening the Medicaid program, which is a way of helping poor people get adequate health care. The third thing is to try to do more about jobs and training people for jobs. Those programs, unfortunately, have been reduced instead of increased, notwithstanding the fact we have more people unemployed now than we had years ago. But those, I think, jobs, health, and food are areas where I would especially concentrate on helping people.
You're the only candidate who says that we can really cut the military budget and still feel safe. Why is that?
I don't know why more people don't see that, because we've had a number of studies that identify waste in the military. Obviously, every American wants us to have what we need to defend ourselves. I'm an old bomber pilot from World War II. I would never advocate cutting defense if I thought that my recommendations were cutting into anything that we need for defense. But when you consider the fact that the Pentagon, which purchases our weapons systems, have had hundreds of billions of dollars in cost overruns, things that turned out to be vastly more expensive than the original contract, or that they buy things in such a way as to waste taxpayers' money. Let me just see if I can illustrate it for you. You can go to your town in Manchester, Maine, and buy a hammer at a hardware store for about $6, maybe $7, maybe $5, but somewhere in that range. The Pentagon buys that same hammer custom-made, and they pay about $400 on the average for every hammer that they have in the Defense Department. Why? What are they pounding over there that's so precious? They have to pound it with a $400 hammer. Now, that wouldn't be so bad. We could probably get away with wasting $400 on a hammer, but when they use the same methods to buy airplanes and tanks and ships, and we end up spending tens of billions of dollars more than is necessary, that's bad. So I have said that if I became the President of the United States, I'd get hold of a real tough-minded businessman, somebody like Lee Iacocca, the president of Chrysler Motors, and I would tell him to do for the Pentagon what he did for Chrysler. In other words, get rid of the fat, the boondoggling, the inefficiency, and the waste. Give us a good, tough, lean, efficient fighting force, but do it for less money.
I like to go to the movies, and I read that you do too. What are some of your favorite movies?
Well, the best one I've seen recently is Terms of Endearment. I thought it was first-rate. I guess maybe one of my favorites of all time would be Dr. Zhivago. I thought it was colorful and romantic and historical, and all the things I like were in that movie.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a school teacher. I went through a period when I thought about being a doctor. There was a while I thought I wanted to be a forester. I wanted to get out in the outdoors, and then some of those cold South Dakota winters took that out of my mind. I decided that might be a little tiresome. So I came under the influence of a history teacher. He was also my debate coach. And I decided to go to college, get a PhD, become a college professor. That's just what I did. And then I got interested in politics, decided to run for Congress, and here I am.
If you had to choose one, which president would you add to Mount Rushmore?
Franklin Roosevelt. I think Franklin Roosevelt was the greatest president of the 20th century. And I don't quarrel with the four that are up there. I guess you know they're out in my state, in western South Dakota. But I think there is room for one more. One day I flew by Mount Rushmore with Ethel Kennedy, and she said when she got back to Washington she was going to tell Jack there was room for one more face up there. That's when President Kennedy was still alive. But I would put Franklin Roosevelt up there with his cousin Theodore Roosevelt.
As president, how would the way you deal with the Soviets be different from the way President Reagan does?
You know that President Reagan in 3 years hasn't even talked to the head of the Soviet government. I think that's a big mistake. I talked to President Nixon, former President Nixon, recently. You know that he and I were bitter rivals. But one thing that we have in common, we both think that the American president should talk regularly to the Soviet leader. I guess that's one big change I would make. Secondly, I wouldn't assume that the talks would go better after an enormous buildup of nuclear weapons on our side. I'd call a halt to this expansion of nuclear weapons that President Reagan has ordered and try a different approach of saying to the Soviets, we're going to halt for a while, not indefinitely until we see what you're going to do, but we've got enough to pulverize everybody in the Soviet Union right now. Even though we don't build another gun or another weapon, it doesn't make any difference if you hit first or we do. Everybody's going to die if war comes, so we're going to halt. We're not going to build the MX or the B-1 or these other enormous new systems, and we're going to try to see if over the next couple of years we can't arrive at a better understanding with the Soviets. If it doesn't work, you can always go back to the arms race again, but that's a dead-end street that I think leads to war.
Do you think you're a better presidential candidate now than you were in 1972?
I think I am for this reason. I'm more patient now than I was in 72. I wanted to get everything done today back in 1972, and that's not the way the political process works. Everything comes slowly. So I think I'd be more patient, more systematic, better organized, maybe a little more philosophical about things now, and perhaps that combination of circumstances would give me a more dependable perspective on the problems that a president has to deal with. I've also learned not to tell the voters that I'm going to do certain things if I'm president without recognizing you have to have the support of Congress for most of those things. When I told you here a while ago we're going to change the tax system, I should say we're going to do it if Congress agrees. But I would try to do certain things with the cooperation of the Congress. I'm not running for dictator. I'm running for president.
I have one more question for you. And I realize that your tie says, don't give up the ship. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I have to tell you, that was given to me Sunday by a man at the Presbyterian Church in New Boston, New Hampshire. I think maybe he thought the tie I had on was a little shabby, but he was also a big Navy supporter, and so I was glad to accept the tie. Let me just add to what I've already said here. I think it's great that you've made that trip to the Soviet Union. I hope it helped remind a lot of people from the president on down that it's possible to talk with people, even with those that we disagree with. I'm sure it was a great experience for you, but I want you to know that many of the rest of us were inspired by what you did.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks to you.
We may edit that.
You were great.
Senator McGovern's tie was perfect for him.
Why do you want to be president?
Well, because that's where the greatest opportunity for change is. Anyone who is not fully satisfied with the country the way it is today and the directions we're going, I think could do more to change those unacceptable conditions in the presidency than anywhere else. Now, that doesn't mean that other people can't contribute to improving the country. I think some of the great writers, the great journalists, the great clergy people, people that minister to health needs, they do a lot that's extremely valuable, but I'm a politician now, and the best place for me is in the White House.